Hello, this is in response to a special request from Heather Pinnegar. She keeps asking me all the time in comments for me to comment about myself. Now, I think it's probably fairly boring for a lot of people. If you talk to me on Skype, you probably know everything I'm about to say, and this is going to be an extremely boring video for you. I apologise for that, okay? But this woman keeps pestering me on all the comments, asking me to do a video talking about myself. Now, I think most people would be far more interested in what's going on in the world, or British food, or other things that my channel is about. But for some reason, she wants to know about me personally, okay? Now, I'm going to admit in advance this is extremely boring, but here goes. Particularly as I don't lead the most interesting of lives, to be very honest with you, okay? I was born and raised in Coventry, in England, which is part of the United Kingdom, which is part of Europe, which is part of planet Earth, which is part of the, I think it's the Milky Way. I think that's our galaxy. I'm not an I'm not an astronomer, so I'm not an expert, and that is part of the universe, okay? But basically, I'm from Coventry in England. I returned to the house that I was born in. Well, I wasn't actually born in this house. I mean, I was born in a hospital. But, you know, once I left hospital with my mum, you know, I came back to this house, okay? I have lived away from home in the past. I went to Brighton University, or Brighton Polytechnic as it was at the time. I could have gone to university, but at the time, as I was the first person from my family ever to go to university or do a degree, I didn't want to go somewhere that was too good in case I failed and left with no degree at all. Bear in mind, back then there was no social media, and very few people went to university, particularly if you were from a poor background. The risk was too great. I didn't know enough back then as a young adult, and it seemed okay. Also, another reason for it was that you had a year's industrial experience, and that would help fund a lot of things for me, as I would get some extra money during the year that I was working. Okay, whereas with a university degree, you just did 3 straight years, and that could put me in additional financial difficulty. Because I was poor at the time, the government paid for everything. So at the time, there was something called a full grant. And if you were poor back then, the government paid for everything. Much to my absolute shock, when I actually went to university, I'll call it university to make it simpler. It was actually Polytechnic, but I'm going to call it university from here on, okay? I was surprised that people from wealthy families were actually jealous of me. They were actually jealous because I came from a poor background. I couldn't believe it. I mean, they'd been on skiing holidays and God knows what, and they were actually jealous of me because I'd got, from their perspective, all this money from the government without having to beg their parents for money. I couldn't believe it. You know, I never would have believed wealthy parents, people with wealthy parents would be jealous of poor kids. I wouldn't have believed it, but there you go. Because they had to beg their parents for money, and often their parents didn't want to give them the money, or their parents wanted to know exactly how they were going to spend the money. And if their parents thought they weren't going to spend the money the way they'd like it, they didn't want to give them the money. Whereas I just got the money from the government without any question. Okay. During that time, for the first year, I studied computer science at university. During the first and last year that I was actually at the university itself, I stayed in halls of residence, okay, and it was catered, which meant that they cooked the meals for you. You have I think it was toast. It's so long ago, I forget. I think as a breakfast, it's so long ago, I truthfully have forgotten, but it was not a full English breakfast. And you had an evening meal, okay? As I said, it's so long ago, I've forgotten exactly what it was. And you could, unless you were disabled, you could only stay in the halls of residence 2 years out of the 3 that you were there. Because obviously another year, you did it as an industrial placement and you had to find your own accommodation for that, okay? The second year, I stayed in a house, a student house, with four other people. Sometimes they had parties there. There's a lot at the time. Lots of people had student parties, and so a lot of people would go around people's houses and trash the place. For not quite, but they would perhaps jump up and down a lot, and perhaps you know throw things everywhere. I don't know. In a lot of student houses, there were orgies, or was it orgies, and things like that. I never involved in any of that aspect of it, but you know, that for those learning English, that means lots of sex in simple terms. During the parties, I wasn't involved in that, and pretty much that's that. Brighton is a seaside resort, and another reason I went there was because I could spend several years living by the seaside. Um, Back in the past, if you had a computer science degree, you could virtually work for any employer you liked. There were very few people understood computers back then, and when I first went there, the prestige of a university degree wasn't that important, or i.e. where you went. They were just lucky to have anybody with a computer science degree at all. When I left, it was a different story, but that's another matter for later, which I'll discuss later. Um, so yes, well, probably quite soon actually, probably even now maybe. So that was really that. Um, yes, lots of people went to the nightclubs there. There were lots of nightclubs in Brighton, lots of nightlife because it was a seaside resort. Um, you got into nightclubs quite cheaply if you had a student card, which I did. Um, and well, I don't know what else do we want to say about that. Then, during the during my industrial placement year, in other words, the third year of the degree, where you had to get a real job, okay, for a year, I worked for a company working on ship control, where they were trying to user interface and some programming of the control of a ship, and I was responsible for looking at the user interface for and also doing some programming for a prototype of how they were trying to computerize all the dials and things like that, and they're trying to computerize that and have it so that it would be done via screens rather than via old-fashioned dials and things like that. And so I worked on that for a year, doing prototypes, doing programming for that and things like that. Then I returned for my final year at the university. After that, there was suddenly a very bad recession, and it was different. Very few people could get a job. I got a job after that working for the government as a civil servant, working on project management, procurement, programming, and also looking after the computers themselves. Okay. And I stayed there for many years. Then my dad died, and I came back to Coventry, where my mum lives. I forgot to tell you, sorry. When I worked at the industrial placement, I worked at Portsmouth, and after when I worked for the government, I worked in somewhere called Huntingdon. Now, Huntingdon you've probably never heard of. It was near Peterborough. But what made Huntingdon in some strange way special at the time was when I lived in Huntingdon, for some of the time, my local MP, my local politician, was in fact the Prime Minister at the time. So you could never really complain to him about the fact you didn't like the government, what the government were doing, because he essentially was running the whole country, right? I mean, you could do, but I doubt he really cared that much, given he'd already made up his mind on things, probably, But although, in fairness, he was known to be a listener more than a governor, to be honest. By that, if you don't know what I'm talking about, I meant he admitted he preferred to listen to what others have to say rather than just saying, you're going to do what I say, and if you don't like it, leave. But I don't know. Anyway, I won't go on too long about politics, as this is not about that. This is supposedly about me. And after that, I worked for a company dealing with handsets and dealing with stock control and things like that via handsets. Okay, so that people could scan things using a handset and it could read barcodes and things like that. And then it could update stock control and other things via this handset. And I built the software for the handset to do this. I also worked on e-commerce, and so I worked on buying and selling things via the internet and doing software programming for that. Then I left there because I'd done what they wanted pretty much. And then I worked for a company, a startup. I actually was in somebody else's house. It was a complete startup. I was their first full-time employee, and I was working on basically the equivalent of Google for banks. Okay, so they wanted to set up a search engine for banking where it would, from scratch, where it would search banks for various information, and rather than people having to search on Google where they would get information from anywhere, a lot of it may be totally useless. This was meant to be targeting just financial institutions and the web pages from financial institutions, and storing those pages and searching those pages and indexing them and categorizing them and things like that. And I worked on that for about a year, but they weren't at the time financially successful. They said they couldn't afford to keep me anymore. I think they probably found somebody else on one of these government schemes for less money, but I don't know about that. So that was that. Then I was unemployed for quite some time because there was a very bad IT recession at the time. But it was known as the dot-com crash, and I believe I was a victim of that. And then I worked for 6 months on I think it's 6, I'm not sure if it was 6 months, but it was several months. I'm not sure exactly how many because I can't remember now. On a government unemployment placement scheme where I worked for a hospital doing computer programming for them. I tried to automate some of the manual systems for them so that they could use things by computer, and rather than wasting their time putting this information in, they could have these small computer systems, which they could bring up, which would do a lot of the automation for them. Then I left because the hospital said they couldn't afford to pay me at all, and the unemployment office said, well, if they can't afford to pay me, then I have to leave. I did nothing wrong. And then I was unemployed for another length of time, and by this time, if you're over 35, they do not want people in computing. It was just the way it was. It's also during a very difficult time with, a huge, .com, as I said, crash. And so then I eventually got a job working from home, selling bouncy castles and things like that, and clothing via the internet for a company that made them and made clothing in Coventry. I stayed there until they went bankrupt about a couple of years ago. Since then, I've been unemployed. That's pretty much it. People ask about me personally. I've never been married. I don't have any children. I don't have any brothers or sisters. I live with my elderly mother. We live in a house, and well, I don't know really what else you want me to say without revealing too much about my private life on the internet, okay? As I'm aware the potential employers of the future might look at this and find any reason at all they can to not employ you. As employers go out their way to look for bad, not good, for whatever reason. Anyway, that's pretty much it. I provided videos on my YouTube channel of roughly where I live, the local park, my city centre, and various things like that. So if you want to know about the area, then there are lots of videos on my YouTube channel which have that. This was a specific request because Heather Pinnegar wanted to know about me, and hopefully this video will answer your questions, okay? If you have any other questions, please leave some comments and I will try and answer them if I'm willing, okay? But I'm also aware that I want to keep some sort of privacy because I don't really care what people know about me, but I do care about perhaps the government or potential employers when I'm looking for jobs, etc., and which I have to do officially according to the government. You know, using whatever I might say against you. It's like, you know, the police, you know. When you get arrested over here, you're told that you have the right to remain silent. I can't remember the exact words, but something along the lines of you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and may be used in evidence against you. And I feel like this with this video, okay? So, thanks for watching. For those who already know me on social media, I'm sorry for boring you to death. I know this will not tell you anything you probably didn't already know. But thanks for watching, guys. Bye.